It's not, yeah. So it's an automatic.
It's a bit scary.
Yeah.
No escape from it.
I was gonna say, I remember being
I was
recorded.
gonna say, a few more microphones are like.
Oh, can you leave the door open for one more second?
Sure.
That's a lot of, and they haven't done the bing bing either.
Oh, yeah, so let's wait for the
That's
thing.
I should use the fire alarm, that'd be more effective.
Yeah, I'll pull that out.
This way. Yeah.
We're trying to.
Are you gonna do a people's holiday? Wow. It was fun. Yeah. Well, people that want to be. All people. You know what? I'm in the day.
We'll get started once we hear the chime and more people start hopefully coming in. But thank you all for being here.
So can we pass that, all right? Yeah. You're going to moderate the questions. Yeah. And then I'll. Yeah. Okay, so that means there. I mean, the other way to do it is the audience. And it's really important, but then the audience will ask about night. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know day 4, early morning session is kind of a struggle, especially after the conference dinner, which I hope you all enjoyed. So thank you again all for being here. My name is Betsy Ingebrigtsen. I work for the World Health Organization on the global analysis and assessment of sanitation and drinking water, commonly referred to as GLASS, which is less of a mouthful. And today we're going to be talking about wash systems data and how we can use them. So a quick session overview. Sorry. So a session overview. I'm going to give a quick presentation of the current GLASS data and talk about what GLASS is for those of you who aren't familiar. Then, assuming technology all works in my favor, I'm going to do a demo of the GLASS data portal, which was launched in February of 2022, and we're really excited about it. Then we have a great panelist, a great panel on from various sectors on how they're going to use, plan to use, and have used GLASS data. And then we're going to have an interactive QA plenary discussion, hearing your thoughts on how WASH systems data, or particularly GLASS data, could be used, has been used, and then we'll have a quick closing. So what are the current WASH systems data? And these are the results from the GLASS 2021-2022 cycle, and they're the most up-to-date data that the WHO has on WASH systems. Before I get into the data, some of you might be wondering what GLASS is. So GLASS monitors elements of WASH systems and the enabling environment. And it is a country survey. So we collect data from countries around the world. They fill out the survey. It's a very participatory process. And the survey covers governance, monitoring, human resources, and finance. But over the years, we've continued to add more topics and more questions, and try to respond to the needs of the sector. The first GLASS report was piloted in 2008 with just a handful of countries to see if this idea would work, or if there was a need for it. And now in 2023, we've had 7 reports and 7 GLASS cycles, and our next cycle will be launching in March or April of 2024, with the next GLASS report coming out in 2025. It's a very long process. We have a long period for data collection because we want it to be flexible for country governments. We don't want to say you have to fill this out in 2 weeks. The data collection period is about 6 months. We do a lot of rigorous data quality assurance and back and forth with countries to make sure the data is of good quality. And then it takes a long time to actually write a full GLASS report. And then also GLASS is a co-custodian for monitoring SDG targets 6A and 6B. 6A is on international cooperation, and 6B is on local participation, and those are the means of implementation targets for SDG 6. And then GLASS, as I was saying, is more than just data at the global level. It is really about the process in countries. So bringing all the different stakeholders around the table, talking about the state of their WASH systems, and then that data then also feeds into global and regional analysis. And then all GLASS, and then I mentioned, all GLASS data are national data reported and validated by governments. So when you look at GLASS data, that is what the government is saying that is their answer. It is not, the WHO hasn't come up with any of the data. It is all directly from the governments. Oh, wrong way. So quick question. Who are GLASS data for? And before you answer that, I'm going to kind of give you a sense of who is in the room. So do we have anyone here who is in academia? Raise your hands. All right. Who here is from an NGO or civil society? Great. Anyone here from a government? And then anyone here from a multilateral international organization? I'm looking at you, Sudan. And any other sort of constituency that I forgot? Donors, I guess. Donors, yeah. All right. Private sector. Oh yeah, sorry. WHO. Forget about the private sector. All right. So it's great that we have a wide range of people in the room, and I would say, who are GLASS data for? The answer is everyone. I think within it, if you're interested in WASH systems or just the enabling environment for WASH, there is hopefully a piece of GLASS data that you can use. We collect data on almost 300 indicators, so there is a lot of information out there. And so a little bit about GLASS, and I'm going to focus on the 2022 report. And so this one was cool. Every GLASS report, we try to do more and more things and try to be more creative in the data analysis that we do. So in the 2022 report, one of the really cool things is we looked at countries' national targets, and we looked at what they had reported as where they are and what they were trying to achieve. And then we compared those that were in need of acceleration versus those that were on track to meet their national targets. And so it was looking at using JMP data, using national government data to see what are similarities or differences on countries progressing towards their national targets. We added questions on climate resilience, and that is an actual section of the GLASS report, which hadn't been as strong before, and we're working to even strengthen that more for the next cycle. We had a section on WASH and health. We are the World Health Organization. We all know also that WASH is critical for health, and coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we really highlighted health. We had a specific section on gender, and then we also had a specific section on data use. And so those were kind of the newer sections that people who had read many GLASS reports might not have seen before. And then we also had our classic GLASS. This is what you expect every time you pick up a GLASS report, you'll find these data. So we had budget and expenditure data for WASH. We had an external support agency, also development partners, and official development assistance data. We had analysis on human resources, on leaving no one behind, on regulation and surveillance, and on policies and plans. And this last cycle, we had the most countries that have ever participated. So 124 countries participated in the glass cycle. This is a side note, but 121 made the report because 3 countries submitted very, very late. So their data is on the data portal, but they were not able to be included in the report. You can see we have wide coverage in Africa and in South America. So we were very excited to have 124 countries. It has grown a lot from the pilot in 2008, which I think was about 10 to 15 countries. So it's really taken off. Countries see the value of it. The global community sees the value of glass. And now I'm going to get into some of the glass results. These are coming from the report. I'm going to share some of our typical results and then some more of the complicated analysis that we did in the report before going into the data portal. So this one, we call these our policy pyramids. You might have seen them if you're familiar with glass. This is kind of a classic glass analysis that we started in 2019. And at the base, you can see, do you have a policy approved or under revision? Yes, the majority of countries do. This happens to be for healthcare facilities, Washington healthcare facilities. Then, okay, out of those under revision, who actually has a formally approved policy? All right, you have your policy. Do you have a plan? Is your plan costed? And you can see the numbers get smaller and smaller. And then finally, is your plan, do you have a policy with a costed plan that is supported by sufficient human and financial resources? And you can see that very, very small number of countries have that for Washington healthcare facilities. That's also common across other for urban sanitation, rural sanitation, drinking water and things. So you can see that as just one sort of analysis that we do. And I think it nicely graphically shows that even if you have a policy in place, you don't have the human and financial resources, your policy is probably not being very implemented very effectively. This is another kind of classic table that we often use in glass. And this one is looking at measures to improve and extend drinking water services to populations disproportionately affected by climate change. So you can see the governance column. Do people have policy? Do they have measures in their policies and plans to address populations affected by climate change? The majority of countries do, broken down by SDG regions. But are you monitoring what those measures are? Are you keeping track of what is actually being implemented or not? You can see it drops quite a bit. The purple column, we're in like the 20%, we have a 36% global. And then do you have financial measures to help support these policy measures to reach populations disproportionately affected by climate change? And you can see the financing drops even lower. So it nicely illustrates that yes, you have you have measures in place, but if you don't have the monitoring of it and the finance of it, are those measures actually just on paper or are they being actually implemented? So this is getting at the target analysis that I talked about earlier. So my team members of my team who are much more statistically advanced than I am did this analysis. So if you're interested in learning more, there's the whole methodology on the glass data portal. But we categorized countries if they were on track to meet their national drinking water targets, if they were almost on track, or if they were in need of acceleration. So this is for drinking water, and you can see that we had 33 countries that were on track. And again, this isn't to meet SDG target 6.1. This is to meet their nationally defined and set targets. And this is, I think, where glass is cool. JMP comes out. JMP does a great value to the sector of looking at internationally comparable estimates of reaching safely managed. But this could be reaching universal basic. It could be reaching maybe 70% safely managed. So what are national governments doing? And are they able to reach their targets or not? And so we had 33 on track and 32 in need of acceleration. And you can see on the map how they vary across regions. And then looking at that, well, then we also did these charts of seeing, okay, what is your annual rate of change required to achieve your national targets? And so I chose this one was drinking water, and it was looking at, okay, this is your latest coverage reported by country are the purple dots, and your national coverage target is the yellow dot. And you can see these are quite steep slopes, and these are the countries that are in need of acceleration. And I think this was interesting analysis, because again, it's looking at countries' national data. It's looking at what they say their current coverage rate is and what they say their national target is. And you can see a lot of countries need to start really ramping up progress if they're going to achieve their own targets. And you can see some of the targets are 2030, some of them are 2025, one's even 2035. So this is just looking at national target data. And then so we compared the countries that were on track to reach their national targets and the countries that were in need of acceleration. And then we did a lot of different analysis. So the team looked at many different indicators to see where there were differences. these are not statistically significant differences. We're not saying this is causation, but it was just kind of some further exploring this sort of analysis of, or can we see differences between countries that are on track or in need of acceleration? And this is just one of the examples for regulation in rural drinking water. And you can see there's quite a difference between the countries that are on track are more likely to have regulators that fulfill these functions than the countries that are in need of acceleration. And if you're more interested in this analysis, we have many more examples in the GLASS report and on the extended methodology for the target analysis that's also available online. So this is a classic, again, all of these, I'm going to say all of these are classic because I'm very passionate about all of this analysis. So this is looking at sources of funding for WASH. So where is the money that is spent on WASH? Where is it being come from? GLASS has collected this data over many, many years. You can see that we had 124 countries participate in GLASS. Only 44 countries out of those were able to provide expenditure data from households, government, external sources, and repayable finance. And you can see from here, households through tariffs and out-of-pocket expenditures contributed to 61% of overall WASH spending. So most of the money in the sector is coming from households. And if you look at these trends over time, it's actually been pretty consistent, even as more countries have been able to provide expenditure data. And this is looking at human resources. This was a new question that we added in the 2021-2022 cycle. And it was looking at, okay, so there's all these different functions that you need to have a successful WASH system: policy development and planning, monitoring and evaluation, regulation, infrastructure, community mobilization, operations and maintenance. And you can see the graph stops at 35%. So most countries reported that they do not have sufficient financial resources to perform their WASH, to perform the WASH functions. So if you think about it, if less than a third of countries don't have sufficient financial resources, what is the state of their WASH systems? Everything can be in place on paper, but if you don't have people to actually fulfill the functions and do the jobs, then that's a serious issue for WASH systems. And then looking at data use. So we've asked this question, I think, at least since 2014 in the GLASS cycle. And it's, so you have this data. Well, A, do you have this data? And if you do, are they used in your decision making? Because I'm sure we all know sometimes data gets collected and just sits somewhere, or isn't in an accessible way, or isn't timely, so it's not really usable. And you can see, so this is looking at drinking water and sanitation, and then for planning processes and sector review, and for resource allocation. And you can see it's about 2/3 of countries are actually using their data in a majority of decisions for drinking water and sanitation. So there's definitely room we can improve within countries of using actual data and making sure, and then looking at it in WASH systems, okay, what can we do to make sure that these data are being used? How do we improve the monitoring? How do we improve data accessibility? And now, before I get into the GLASS data portal, because I'm going to be up here a fair amount talking, I thought if there were any questions anyone had from the audience on the GLASS process, on GLASS data, I'm happy to take those before I then dive into the GLASS data portal. Yeah.
Where do we get this? The whole thing.
Yeah, it's actually, if you go to glass.who.int, it's on the data portal, and the most recent report is on the data portal, and then there's links to other documents, but all of the data from 2013, 2014 is on the data portal, which sounds kind of, it's a huge feat. It used to be before that there would be Excel sheets with the data from each data cycle, or you'd have to ask the GLASS team to get the data. And so now having it all be publicly available on the data portal, I think is a huge step forward for, I think, for the sector, and just being a resource of WASH systems data that are more easily accepted. Yeah. Go ahead in the back.
Yeah, how come India is not, doesn't have any important data?
No, that is a very good question that we get all of the time. So WHO is an organization of member states, and we cannot, participation in GLASS is completely voluntary. So we worked very hard with our regional and country offices to try to get India to participate, but the government of India just didn't. I don't know all of the politics or why they didn't, but they didn't participate, and there's only so much pushing that we can do when we can't force them to participate. So unfortunately, they did not participate in the last cycle. We realized that is a huge missing hole that we would like to fill. And so I think for the next cycle, we're going to do more effort to try to get them to participate, but ultimately it depends on the country. if you have anyone in India that you can advocate for, if they would like to help us push the government to complete glass, that would be great. Any other questions before we, oh yeah,
With all this data coming in from so many countries, I'm sure that quality assurance and quality control probably needs to be up a little bit at night. How well does that work? And at the end of the day, how strongly do you trust all the data? We have to work with what we get, but can you talk about quality control, quality assurance and how that works?
So every survey that we get, and the survey is about 60 pages and many questions, it's very long. It's hard to cut questions because someone we know somewhere is using that data, or if we cut it, then people will be like, why did you cut that question? So long surveys, the GLASS team reviews every single survey that comes in. We have people that check against national policies, check against references. My colleague who works on the financial data does all of these magical calculations, make sure they make sense compared with previous years. He has a very rigorous thing that I could follow up if you wanted more details. I don't know exactly how he does it, but we look at every answer. If answers aren't inconsistent or don't make sense, we follow back up with the country and we have a back and forth process, which is why the GLASS cycle also takes so long, because we don't just get the survey and plug it into the data portal and then go with it. It is really a dialogue with countries. And I think over the years, we've really improved the strength of our quality assurance process. But I think, as you said, at the end of the day, and as nationally government reported data, it is what it is. Some of it honestly is subjective, fuzzy data. What is the implementation of your policy? We can't do scientific calculations and say it should be partially implemented rather than fully implemented. But I think we are working on that. And I think we do, we rigorously review every single survey and have a back and forth. And also the government validates it. So ideally, I think some of you are probably thinking, oh, someone in the government gets it, sits in their office by themselves, fills it all out, and then sends it off. And that's really where every now and then that happens, but really, and I can find the stats, the majority of people involved, tons of stakeholders, have multiple meetings, have a government validated workshop. So it's also being quality controlled with the government. So the government agrees, which is why the GLASS process is important, because people are able to discuss the status of their wash system through GLASS, and then it comes up to us. Yeah, one in the back and then.
Yeah, you had mentioned, I think that you're measuring progress against their own country, not against JMP targets. I guess I'm just wondering if you see in the report that there's almost, you look better if you have less aggressive targets because you can show more progress towards them or more hope of reaching it, and it almost disincentivizes having more aggressive targets.
No, that's a great question, and we get into that a little bit in the report because target setting is ultimately a political thing, and there's different ways you can approach it. We have to do universal access. It's great. We are never going to make it, but we have to set that sort of ambitious aspirational target versus, yeah, we set a target at 55% and we're currently at 49% and there's an election coming up and we know we can make it. So it's a different sort of thing. And I think ultimately you'll see there's a range of targets, but the amount of countries that have actually done universal access is interesting. And then, so we didn't do it in 2021 and 2022, but in the 2019 report, we got a bunch of data on national targets and we compared them to the JMP ladders of safely managed basic and looked at that for urban, for different sectors. And it was really interesting though to see are countries aspiring to safely manage, or are they just aspiring to basic as well? And so that's, if you want to look more into that, that would be in the 2019 report. No, it's a good point. It is ultimately a political process that we can't really comment on. We just get the data that comes in and realizes countries are different ways of doing the politics of targets. One in the front, and then I'm going to go to the data portal.
Yeah, we just have got a problem in, we had a presentation on Tuesday from the United States. I've seen similar presentations in Canada and Australia, other countries like that, where they only report, say, 10,000 connections and above, or, community water systems of certain size and above, don't report the communities below that. And that can be millions of people that get missed off. Is there a decision on GLASS to try to move to require countries to report all the population, including the remote communities, small communities, try and capture those? Because they'll give you 100% on their report, but they've forgotten the 5% of the population that isn't served, but that is not on the big systems, so they don't even try to report it.
Yeah, so I think the GLASS the GLAS indicators are more about systems, so it's not necessarily about like the number of connections or the population served. The coverage data that they report, I honestly have not dug into like who they were including or not. I think one thing that is interesting is that we do ask about the vulnerable populations in different settings about like populations of disproportionately affected by climate change, people living in remote or hard to reach areas, people living in poverty, and we have like ethnic and religious minorities. And we would have, countries would often say this doesn't apply to us. And it would be like women, and it'd be like, we don't have like, and so then we asked a question of like, well, clearly you have women in your country, or you have to have people living in poverty in your country, like, and so then we then explicitly added a column that says, this population doesn't exist in my country. And then we've gotten better, like we've pushed, and then for like populations living in poverty and women, that option doesn't exist there, but if it's like remote or hard to reach areas, some people say, no, there's none of that in our country. So if you looked at that, you could kind of get to see how countries are thinking about the populations that they're thinking about serving or reporting on. All right, so thank you all. This is really great discussion. And again, there'll be many more opportunities for participation and discussion. We want this to be really interactive. So just a little bit about the GLAS data portal before I go into the demo. So it really is an interactive way to look at data. And we have all of the GLAS data from countries from 2013 to 2014. So you can do trend analysis on questions. We've changed questions over time, but we're also trying to keep certain ones the same to really see the trend. And then you can do analysis at the global, regional, or country level. For the regions, we have SDG regions and we have WHO regions. And then we're currently working on compiling metadata for all 300 indicators, and we are soon that will be on the data portal. So if you with the metadata, you can see when was the question added, how has it changed, what is it measuring, all of the scale of it. So it'll be soon. The data portal is going to just go leaps and bounds ahead for accessibility and for usability and understandability. So we're really excited about the metadata. It takes a long time. We're currently all in the GLAS team going through and filling out Excel sheets with all of the information about indicators, but it's coming. And then other things, we're always working to improve the data portal. So as I said, it launched in February 2022, and we're still working on, we also work on WASH accounts, which is WASH expenditure data. So we're going to add that data, have a WASH accounts highlight. We're also hoping to add a library of GLAS documents. So all the GLAS surveys, reports, country highlights and things from past years would be on the GLAS data portal. They're currently on the WHO website. And then we're also hoping to add national policies and plans and national documents that countries submit as part of their GLAS process, as part of their GLAS survey submission. And so we're always working to improve the data portal. Now, I'm sure you've all been waiting for the moment. We're going to go to the GLAS data portal. We have a sip of water. So this is what it looks like. And one cool thing is that you can actually do it all in English, French, Spanish, and soon Russian. That's coming soon. Our European office was excited about having it in Russian. All right, so on the data portal, we have, this is the link, to answer the question up here. This is where the GLAS 2022 report link is. And then we have different areas and different things that you can do. So I'm going to start with what I think is very important, but not the most visually exciting, and work our way to what I think is starting from the least cool, but cool, to the most exciting, very cool stuff. So first of all, the data, the basis of this, and you can look, and so we've separated out by topics. So there's governance, monitoring, human resources, and finance. I'm clearly not going to read all of these, but you get a sense of what's on there. And then you can also search by indicator type. And so for here, as a demonstration, we're going to look at coordination. So do countries have a mechanism to coordinate across ministries and institutions? I'll click that one. And then you have to click a bunch and then hit search before it shows up. So it's normal that it's blank right now. And then we'll look at a frequency of coordination. And so when you're at data, you can select many indicators, but I'll just do 2 for this. And then let's see 2021, 2018. We can select all countries, but you can see there's the world, WHO regions, SDG regions. Oh, and we also have World Bank income group. So then click search. It thinks for a second. And then this is all of the data from those 2 indicators that I selected for the years that I selected. And then you can do the default view. You can do an unpivoted view. You can actually, this button, you can create the link. You can send that link to someone and it'll put them directly to the data set that you were looking. looking at, and then you can also export it to Excel. And this is, so this is all of the GLASS indicators, over 300 indicators, or up around 300 indicators are here that you can download for different years, different regions, different countries. So it really, and then you can take your Excel sheet and do fancier analysis than is possible on the data portal. So it's really has improved the accessibility of GLASS data tremendously. And then getting a little fancier from just the actual data, we can do some visualizations. And so again, the same, this looks like it was on the data page. We have the topics. We have the indicators. In this one, I'm going to choose, I could scroll down. I'm just choosing ones near the top to prepare you from seeing all the scrolling, but you can see there's a lot of indicators. All right, let's look at budget per capita. All right, scroll too much. There's a lot of indicators, as I said. All right, annual budget per capita, and then scroll down again, hit search. And then you'll see the data there, which you can export, but then you also see this visualization, and this just shows, so this is your percent government watch budget and a percentage of GDP. And it shows by all countries. You can sort by country, you can sort by value, you can do ascending or descending. You can export this graphic in multiple formats, and you can link to the graphic and download the data. And then let's say we wanted to do some trend analysis on this one. Hit trend, go down, hit search. This is going to look intense at first. So that's all the countries with looking at it, but then, all right, so that's really intense. You can see there's quite a range of data. So let's then select just one country. So let's do Bangladesh. Again, then we could go down and hit search. And then that nicely just shows how Bangladesh's budget as a percentage of GDP has increased over the GLASS cycles. So there's really a lot of ways that you can see this, and the visualizations are here by country. But then let's do another one. Let's go back to our coordination mechanism. So does a coordination mechanism exist? And then let's select all countries. Search. And then this gives us a nice pie chart. So they're not the most beautiful graphics. They are easily producible, easily then if your graphic design is your passion, you can easily make it look nicer, but it's a nice way that you can clearly show visualizations on the GLASS data portal, all of the indicators. And now moving on to key findings. So these are what we based on some of our what we thought was the most insightful analysis and some of the coolest analysis that we did in the 2019 report, because we were developing the data portal after the 2019 report. And so again, you'll see our main areas of GLASS: governance, monitoring, human resources, finance, equity. And let's look at monitoring. Oh wait, actually, I wanted to go to one more exciting one, sorry. Equity, you'll see the table that I talked about earlier. So let's do populations living in poverty, all SDG regions, 2021. We can see sanitation, drinking water, and hygiene. And it creates that table that I showed earlier. So this is where you can get a little bit more of the complicated analysis that you can't get in the visualization. So you can do this for different regions, for different services, different vulnerable populations or settings. And so I think this is very cool, also exportable over here. And then we have also our famous policy pyramid. And let's do sanitation. Let's do rural, and we can do the world. Oh, and this one, it just automatically updates. So then you can create the policy pyramid that I showed earlier for Washington healthcare facilities about any of these subsectors that you want. And so these are where you get slightly more complicated analysis, which is a kind of our classic GLASS analysis. And the highlights, in the key findings, I mean. And then finally, we have the GLASS highlights. And these are our GLASS country highlights. So we realized about in 2014, that countries would spend all this time submitting their GLASS data, and then they saw a global report, but what did they get? And we thought it was unfair to not give something in return to countries. So we created country highlights, which are snapshots, overviews of the GLASS survey submission. They cover the vast majority of the country survey. And so is there a country anyone is excited about that hopefully they participated in GLASS? Anyone name a country? Ethiopia, all right. Thank God no one's in India. All right, so this is the Ethiopia country highlight. And so then it shows we have an overview, talks about policies and plans, the progress towards national targets. We have regulation and standards, coordination mechanisms, financial resources, and then human resources. So this is one page that's an overview of all of the main GLASS areas. Again, this is all coming from the GLASS country survey submission, and then here we have some data from OECD. And then up there, I know I'm sorry, I'm scrolling really fast, but I don't, you guys, I think, understand what the potential of this is. And then up at the top, we have policies and plans, targets, regulations and standards, data and coordination, finance, human resources, equity, and SDG 6 monitoring. Look at data and coordination. So then it's more detail from what the overview is. And so these are things that countries can use in meetings with various stakeholders, or if you know, if you're an NGO that's going to have a meeting with the government, you can quickly want to see the sense of like overall what their WASH system looks like. This is a great resource for the country highlights. And again, we prepared them for every country that participated in the GLASS cycle. We also have data from the other years. So, but this one, if you click on these, they are probably not fully completed because we base the country highlights on the most recent survey and some questions change. But you can look at trend analysis here too, or kind of see how things compare and contrast. And then finally, if you are a little curious about how we work and what we do, we have quick little summaries and links to more in depth. So that's the GLASS data portal. I know there's a lot to take in. I think anytime you're dealing with 300 indicators across a range of things, we have actual budget data, we have binary answers, we have all sorts of different data all combined here. But does anyone have any questions on the data portal?
It's a very exhaustive process to kind of look into so many companies and so many indicators. I was wondering, what's the frequency in terms of how many times people get the data from the countries and how often do they actually?
That was a very good question that I completely glossed over. And we do GLASS cycles. Initially, it was every 2 years, but then we realized that things weren't necessarily changing as quickly, and so now we're doing about every 3 years.
Is there any prime example of who are using this data so far to make some data-driven decision making, either the government or an NGO?
Well, you kind of, that's a quite great question for the panel, which is what we'll be discussing. And then also my next slides are literally called examples of GLASS data use. But as a quick answer, I think we know that governments are using data. We've collected a lot of information on that. We have anecdotal evidence from NGOs and donors and things. So really everyone, I think, is using this data.
Yeah, just I remember the discussion we had with GMP reporting process where WHO and UNICEF are processing globally across the countries. And how do you define, how do you give them definitions for services and then different terminologies? Because national definitions are sometimes different from the global definitions, I mean, especially in terms of the WASH sector. So how do you correlate?
That's very good. I'm going to take a few questions at once to be more efficient. Then
Yeah, so 61% contribution for our WASH coming from households. That's a really huge number. Are you considering to give it a breakdown? Because I would be very much interested, like, how much of the 61% actually goes towards their rates? How much goes to households investing in their own water tank? How much goes to households investing in a water filter? And even if there would be possibility to now capture the women carrying the water from the water collection point to their household, because basically that's also a household investment, although it's in time.
Yeah, so I will answer that one and then do definitions, and then I'll move on to data use, because I realize we want to make sure we have enough time for the panel to talk. So with that question, we actually developed to further look at WASH expenditures and to help countries be able to better report on their WASH expenditures. We developed a methodology called the TRACFIN methodology, which is used to produce WASH accounts, and it looks at what all the financial flows in the WASH sector. Is it coming from tariffs? Is it coming from household expenditures? Is it household expenditures on soap versus on building the trains versus on drinking water services? So we have a methodology for that. I'm happy to talk to you more in a coffee break, because it's kind of complex, and I think I would leave you all more confused if I just start rambling about it right now. But like the level of detail of like, how do you capture time of women walking to get water and stuff, I think that is, we have not figured out how to do that. I think that's the beyond of scope that we do, and specifically with glass too, like we are looking at, we're trying to do a very complex thing and trying to do something that's also useful globally, and so we can't get too in the weeds. But I understand like the wanting to know that next step of information. Definitions, really good point. JMP, to do what they do, needs to be very strict on what they do, because they're ultimately producing internationally comparable estimates. So in the GLASS survey, we're actually trying to figure out what governments are doing. So we don't, if they're not doing safely managed, that's okay. We have a glossary in the GLASS report. We have questions trying to get at, like when we're categorizing targets, we had questions on, okay, so do you have water accessible 24 hours a day? What is the water quality? Like trying to get at aspects of safely managed without actually just saying safely managed. But ultimately, when you fill out the GLASS report, you're using your own national definitions for things, and we're just curious about how governments are thinking about their wash system and what they're doing, and we're not upset if they're not using safely managed or if they're not using the proper definition of it. It's kind of what are governments doing in their own wash systems. All right, now I'm going to do 2 quick slides on data use, and then you won't have to hear me talk anymore, and then we'll have the panel come up. So these are examples of GLASS data used by governments. They come, so as part of the GLASS survey, we have a feedback form, and we've actually asked governments, how are you using GLASS data? What are you doing with it? So some of this comes from this. Also, some of this is anecdotally from being in various workshops or just having interactions with countries. So, and there's broad themes, and I should say, soon we'll be publishing actually guidance on GLASS data use and a document that summarizes all of our country examples of GLASS data use under various themes. So watch this space. We will be promoting it on Twitter. It'll be hopefully on the GLASS data portal. And I think it's really cool that we're finally bringing all of this together. But so some quick examples. Azerbaijan used it to develop a national drinking water quality standard. In Bangladesh, they used it to develop 3 different policies. And you can see this took over various GLASS cycles because it was the National Strategy for Water Supply and Sanitation, a pro-poor strategy, and a sector development plan. And you can see different years. And then Bangladesh has participated in GLASS for quite a few cycles. In Guinea, the GLASS process created an opportunity to advocate for a budget line from the government for financing for rural sanitation. And I realize I'm not in the details of all of these examples because we only have a few examples. So if you want more information, I don't know if Guinea actually got the budget line, but it was good that they were advocating for it. In Liberia, the GLASS process has empowered the government to assemble all national institutions involved with WASH in a series of meetings to conduct a self-evaluation. So it's really about the process and the importance of bringing stakeholders together. And then in Tunisia, and along GLASS with other monitoring data highlighted a critical policy gap for regulating WASH in schools. So here you can see for dealing with regulation, dealing with coordination, with policy programming. So it's really GLASS has been very useful to governments from a variety of angles. And then in Zimbabwe, the SWA, Sanitation and Water for All, country monitoring champion, found the data gathered through GLASS to be very useful in completing the 2022 SWA self-assessment. So they're using GLASS in a more regional global process. And then some more examples, and this is very selective of where GLASS has been used by other UN agencies. And so in the past few years, there was the WHO, UNICEF, and World Bank came out with the State of Drinking Water report, the State of Sanitation, and the State of the World's Hygiene, and GLASS's focus. GLASS is featured in all of those reports. There was a Sustainable Development Goal 6 census report that came out earlier this year. GLASS data was used in that, not only for our monitoring 6A and 6B, but about WASH systems. And then I think it was in 2021, UN Women does a gender snapshot of all of the SDGs, and for SDG GLASS data was used. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm sure there's other organizations that are using GLASS data, but I just wanted to highlight some of the examples of recent use where it has been. And you should all check out of the State of the World's reports. They were very cool reports for the sector. And then, so just quickly, some ideas for GLASS data use that I've had that maybe to get you all thinking, maybe the panel as well. Academic research. What research questions do you have? Maybe some evidence for developing core indicators to monitor the strength of WASH systems. Maybe how do we benchmark countries or some sort of index? Like, is there a way that we can bring all of these 300 indicators and actually figure out which ones are the most meaningful and kind of combine them in a way that would be more digestible to a broad audience? I think there's opportunities with further analysis with JMP data. and then also just broadly in advocacy efforts. I think with that, I've already had 2 rounds of questions. I'm gonna turn it over to the panel, and I'm gonna turn it over to Clarissa Brocker-Host, who will be monitoring the panel. And thank you all very much.
Okay, that's true. That was a rapid fire run through. Becky, did you want to just see if there's any questions
Yes.
related? I
Oh, yes, I
want,
ran away.
she ran away, so let's get her back. Are there any questions on those last few slides that Betsy, yeah, Harold?
Just an interest on the very early slide, you showed the map and you showed some countries in blue. Where I presume it's not the government who are reporting, but I saw WaterAid for the UK.
Yeah.
Presumably that's because the British government doesn't want to report or and somebody else is, and does that create tension or is there controversy or any? Can you just say a few words about that?
Did everybody hear the question? You better repeat the question.
Okay, the question was about, so on this map, there's countries in purple, and then there's like WaterAid noted or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation noted, and what does that mean? So those were, so I skipped this part, sort of focusing on country data, but GLASS also collects data from external support agencies such as WaterAid, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, World Bank, USAID, and then we include that data in the report of what our development partners doing to help support governments, or maybe not support governments in certain situations, within their WASH system. So this shows the external support agencies. And then the high income countries, we open it up. I know this past year we had Italy participate, Norway kind of participated. But I think the British government is not one of our main target countries to participate, although it'd be really cool if they did. Oh.
Oh, wow, see? Okay, so this lady right here in the green cardigan.
Thank you.
No, go to Louis.
Just taking you a little back to the slide on the funding that is going into what. I'm just curious to know how I will follow this at the country level, because at the national level, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, even for governments to keep track of the funding that is going into WASH, because there's so many partners and players.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think you can see that's why we only have 44 countries that were able to provide funding from all of the sources, and then that's also the WASH accounts and the tracking methodology that I had mentioned briefly that I'm also happy to talk about at the coffee break, but it is looking at a way that governments can systematically track all of the expenditures that are coming from different sources. And the idea too is to hopefully track the money that's coming in from NGOs and donors that the government might not be aware of or doesn't pass through the government.
Louis?
The second to last slide, one with the bullet.
And then we'll go to you. And then there's a lady.
Yeah, the bullet. That one? Or which?
Yeah, that one. The idea is the second one, evidence for developing core indicators to monitor the strength of WASH system. That's really interesting, but it's also interesting that you talk about systems, about the GLASS data being about systems. So here you're saying we need to develop core indicators to monitor the strength of WASH system, but you're also saying all the GLASS data is about WASH. So I'm wondering what the difference is and what you're planning to do about that point, or what you're expecting somebody else to do about that.
No, that's a very good question, and I think, so I mentioned GLASS up to 300 indicators. That's not necessarily an easy digestible way to like look at a report and then you have to look at 300 indicators across all these countries. So is there a way that can we use this breadth of information that GLASS has developed to come up with, okay, what are the most like telling indicators, or what a way could we come up with some sort of index of bringing all of them, and maybe not, I don't think all of these indicate, I think all the indicators are important, but they're probably not all equally important, if that makes sense, when you have 300 indicators. So like, how can we bring this together? And right now, this is in a very early idea stage, where I put it on the ideas slide and not our next step slide. But I think it would be great to work with partners on how to like figure out what would be the most important things, and how we could come up with a simpler, I know there's been a lot of talk in the sector too about these core indicators. I've heard people say 5, which that seems like a very small number, but then I've heard people say 50, but that's also, both of those numbers are much less than like 300. So kind of figuring out there's a lot of information out there. What can we do that would be the most important that is happening, these watch system conversations that are happening all over the sector in conversations and meetings and things. So kind of how can we then use the evidence that's already out there to contribute to those?
But it's
conversations?
also possible that indicators of the strength of Washington wouldn't be captured currently in class, and you might have to add a couple.
Yep, that is also very, very, very true. I am not saying that GLASS is the definitive source of all information on watch systems. And I think too, GLASS is really cool because it's flexible. We are able to add questions quite easily because it's a small team and ultimately the team makes the decision on what's important to add questions. And so we're pretty nimble on that front. We just get to, that's also why we ended up with 300 indicators. So we are able to add questions.
Cool, thank you.
So I suggest we take one here and then one from the lady in the back, and then you answer those two together.
Any borehole data?
That is beyond the scope of what we do.
Yeah, that would be more JMP data, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether you have indicators that review coordination from national to the local level, because that's the most challenging by contacting the nation.
Yeah, I think, so I was actually surprised that it took us this long to get to like a sub-national local level question. So ideally, yes, but it's really like, again, we're trying to do a global survey, and so we're really looking at national level. We can't get into like the sub-national local level in all of these countries, and so it's something that we think about all the time. It comes up every time I ever talk about GLASS, but as of now, no.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Betsy. I'm sure lots of people have more questions that they'd like to.
Yeah.
But she'll be around at the coffee break. Okay, we've got a panel now of 4 people. If I could ask the panel to come up, we're going to dive a bit more into this issue of how GLASS data is being used and what the future might look like. So there's only 4 seats at the table, so I have to stand here. If I stand behind this, I'm so short, I sort of disappear. So I'm gonna kind of stand to one side. Great. You've all carefully not sat underneath your photographs, so yeah, it's a puzzle, it's a puzzle. Match the picture to the panelist. So thanks very much. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in 2 parts. First, I'm going to ask our panelists to look back and tell us about their experience with GLASS so far, both GLASS as a process and the GLASS data. And then I'm going to ask them to look forward and tell us a little bit about what they would like to see happening in the future and how they might see using GLASS data in the future, or what kinds of changes they'd like to see in GLASS. So at the same time, I'd like you're all the panel, okay? We're all the panel here. I'm very interested if anybody in the audience also has examples of how they've used GLASS data, or the kinds of things they now a bit more about the GLASS, what you'd like to see in the future. I'd be very happy to call on members of the audience as well. So first, I want you to look back and tell us a bit about how you've used GLASS data. But before I do that, perhaps I'll just go through very quickly and have you each introduce yourself. Ellen, can I start with you?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? In the back? Okay, great. I'm as opposed to trying to eat the microphone. So I'm Ellen Walter. I work for IRC and work on advocacy and influencing in partnerships. And so that's a bit of my perspective that I'll be bringing here to the table.
Hi, everyone. My name is James Winter. I'm a water and sanitation advisor with USAID based in Washington, D.C. And my role is designing, managing, and evaluating water and sanitation programs across parts of West Africa and Zambia. And excited to bring that planning and funding role to the panel.
Good morning, everybody. This is Sudan Panti from WNCO Country Office, Nepal. For more than 20 years, I worked for Nepal government in the sector of WAS, and now since last 12 years, I am WAS focal point at Country Office, WNCO. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Nilo. I'm a WAS specialist based in New York. I also used to work in the country offices. So I've used this type of data both at local level and global level. So hopefully we can share some.
I think you forgot to mention you're with UNICEF.
Oh, and I work for UNICEF.
But it's on. Okay, that's great. So perhaps going in the same order, can I ask, Ellen, I'll start with you. So the question is, how have you used GLASS data in the past, either the process or the data itself?
Yeah, so a lot of the use in the past, networks of civil society have often used this data along with other data for accountability purposes. So identifying where there might be opportunities to engage or to advocate, to craft specific messages that come out of that. So that's one aspect. Another, I think the process itself and providing the space to influence as the data is being reported. So understanding what the process is, again, from kind of civil society and having them come in to bring this into national level dialogue conversations and other things along the way. So assessing that and then have supported this process a little bit through some of the, again, advocacy work that's been done. So the comments that Betsy was talking about around, or the example from Bangladesh, all of those successes had also aspects of civil society kind of engagement in that. The one thing though that the last reflection I'll make is that it often is difficult because there's so much different data that you can use this sometimes as like what window within the system to where to start to think about things, but a lot of that also happens outside of GLASS. So just because the GLASS report is there, it doesn't always mean that it's used in all of the countries for a lot of the advocacy and influencing work, but it's one of, I think, many tools that we use as part of that process.
So do you think there's a growing awareness of the availability of this data among NGOs and civil society?
I think that there is. I think that there's also national, like the other, not in this report, national level dialogues and conversations where this information is also coming up, as well as things like JMP. And so it's I think sometimes difficult to look at all of the different aspects and making sure that when there's discrepancies, also using that for accountability.
Okay, thanks very much. James, everybody in the back, can you still hear? Or do you want us to start using the mic? No, you can hear. Okay, great. James, can we turn to you as a donor agency?
And Alan, thanks for mentioning the use of it from an accountability framework. I think the way I use it and the way the DC office typically uses it at AID is from a planning perspective. And there are three main ways that we use GLASS data. One, for our high priority country designation process. So there are 22 high priority countries for water and sanitation and hygiene for USAID. These 22 are technically redesignated every year, but most of the heavy lifting was done using some of the GLASS data this past year and the year prior. And what we're looking in that prioritization exercise is looking at countries that have high needs, certainly, but also those that have high opportunity. And we use GLASS, we rely on GLASS really for things like human resources assessment, policy and plan existence, budgeting, monitoring, investments, things like that, as a really key part of how we're assessing the opportunities index that a country may have for return on investment from USAID funding. The second piece is around country strategy documents. Again, governance and finance data is extremely difficult to collect. Of course, we have our government partners that we liaise with all the time, but being able to benchmark it with other countries using GLASS data makes it really an invaluable resource. We also use TrackFin. I'm not certain where's Betsy? I'm not certain the relationship between GLASS and TrackFin, but we also use TrackFin.
And you when you refer to wash accounts, that's the new name for TrackFin.
Okay, yes,
So
we
they are-
rely on that quite heavily as well. And then the final piece is on new project design, where wherever we are in the program cycle, we're looking for areas that we can invest to improve capacity. And GLASS is a great resource for us to better understand which government institutions have the highest opportunity for this type of investment. So I'll pause there.
Thanks very much. So Sudan, I think you wanted to talk from the Nepali perspective, both the process of GLASS as well as the GLASS data. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Thank you, Clarissa. Yeah, actually, let me start with the process. Nepal participated glass survey since the first cycle in 2008. And every cycle, Nepal has done some progress, and the latest cycle, Nepal did survey as the e-glass, that is electronically. And in every cycle, we started with the request from the government, WNC itself, facilitated to do that. The question was there from India. If India really wants to join the glass survey, first, WHO focal point or any development partner focal point can talk to the government authority to describe the importance of the glass and convince them to seek the request later. And this is the process. And there are three main important points we have to follow in the process. That is the leadership of the government always. Doing the glass survey, if there are consultants to do the survey, that will not very good. In case of Nepal, in every cycle, government focal point who are the leader and himself or herself did the entire leadership to do the survey, number one. Number two is the involvement of the stakeholders and multi-sector. For example, education, health, there are so many questions, and they should be involved in different thematic groups, like a governance, capacity building, or human resource, or monitoring, whatever they are financing. Normally, government people lead, and we as development partners support as the co-lead like that. And third one is the second one is the engagement, and third one is that government request and consent letter, both. That is after that report should be submitted through the government. These are the three very important. And talking about the use of the data, obviously every survey that is the use in Nepal also turning into the action. That is every data, we try to for the betterment in the water sector, for the universal coverage. That by developing the few policy documents, revision of the documents, development of the standards. In that way, I have few just 4 or 5 points I would like to, how did we use? First one is that we moved from the financial glass. One component is the WASH finance. We initiate the WASH account through the tracking process, as my colleague mentioned. That was very important, Nepal did. Second is that we did have so many documents, policy documents, very old documents, not revised according to the new government system. All the WASH Act, WASH policy, national standard for drinking water, national standard for the wastewater effluent, national standard for WASH in healthcare facility. These are the recent documents Nepal endorsed because of the glass survey data. They use a lot from those. And third one is the budget line in WASH in healthcare facility and budget for the water quality surveillance. There was big gap. Recently, because of this survey, Ministry of Health and Population, they started to put some budget line for that. And the last one is the GMP was joint monitoring, joint sector review was stagnant since 2014 because of every time there was question, either you have conducted joint sector review or not. And because of some pressure from this glass, Nepal recently in 2023 conducted, after 8 years, we have conducted that joint sector review. And maybe next I will talk about the monitoring, that is Yanwas. Now I stop there.
Okay, thanks very much. So listening to you speak, I get the impression that the process of the glass has really brought government together, different parts of government together to talk about WASH as an issue. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And also there must be at least 2 workshops. That is, the one is the informatic workshop, that's consultative. Normally we explain why it is important. We invite all the government, all line ministries and all development partners. That is, and we distribute the role of the lead, co-lead for the finance, for the capacity building, like that. And after vigorously we collect the data, just as CC mentioned, about 6 months, we just collecting the data and finally in the validation workshop,
Validation.
again do with the validation workshop with the
Okay.
stakeholders.
Yeah,
The
okay, so an
Thank you.
interesting process. Okay, Mike, let's go to you from the
Yeah,
UNICEF perspective.
So really, we use the glass at different levels, at our country office, and very similar to what, some of my colleagues here have shared. We've used it in a bottleneck analysis, situation where we might be using our bottleneck analysis tool, and we would use some of the data from glass in there. When, in our country office, normally every program cycle, you would do a situation analysis. And in the situation analysis, we often, use glass data. It's great that now you can actually get individual data instead of trying to like break down the report and rip it apart. So that's fantastic. So I think in that sense, the country offices will be using them more, moving forward. The other ones, I mean, you shared earlier, I'm glad to see the state of the world's reports on sanitation, hygiene and water. That's certainly how we mostly use the glass data, is to kind of advocate globally. But perhaps the one that's most important now is in our global strategy, and our strategic plan now, we have two main kind of outcome areas, right? One is service delivery, and the other one is system strengthening. What we wanted to do was really use a lot of the glass data, because it's the one that everyone is sharing, and it's easier to kind of track yourself against. The challenge is cycles and the like. But right now we have one indicator, which is countries reducing the funding gap towards national WASH targets as one of our key indicators under that system strengthening, and we're primarily relying on glass to be able to kind of report forward against that. So we do that a lot with JMP indicators, and we're trying to do that more with glass. We're hoping that this whole idea that she was sharing around core indicators, or perhaps an index, would certainly help us use a lot more of this data at global level as well.
Yeah. Okay, before I go to the next round of questions for the panel, do any of you have either questions you want to ask the panel on that first set of questions, or examples that you want to offer about using glass data? I can see Julia and the lady behind her, who I think is with the Ghanaian government, Susie, right? Julia, do you want to go first, and then I'll ask Susie?
Sure, no, thanks, Marisa. I just wanted to reinforce the point Susie was making about the program. I think it's very important, because the data is one thing, how you use it, different constituencies. But just the fact that there is a focal point in each country that is filling out the glass survey, not doing that himself or herself. There's a whole process that happens behind doors, with the intention of bringing people together, discussing the results and showing the weaknesses in the data that is shown. And just an example is precisely the WASH accounts. Countries are asked to report information on finance, on sector finance, and for many countries, this data is just not available. And that has triggered a whole cycle of requests to WHO to support countries to actually do WASH accounts. So I think it's that cycle that emerges from the process of doing the glass is as valuable, I would say, as the data itself. So,
Yeah, thanks very much. That's Susie, very happy to have you with us. Yes, I would like to ask you to stand, because otherwise it's hard to hear you.
So, glass in Ghana is led by the Ministry of Sanitation and Glass. And yes, with the use of the data, we are making progress. We are not where we used to be. We made progress in the use of the data, but of course, we are not where we want to be. And in terms of the use of the data, first of all, you really need to disseminate the findings first before people get to know that you have this kind of data available. And so what we do is to identify, because it's difficult to get a dedicated budget for dissemination, we normally write on the backs of existing platforms to make sure that the stakeholders know that this kind of information is available. And also keep reminding them, and that is the reason why you use existing data, because sometimes after the validation, people sometimes forget that we didn't have that data if you go to sleep. So you still keep using the existing platform to remind people, stakeholders that you have this data that you can use. And for Ghana, we also don't really stress on the trying to identify bottlenecks and how to resolve it. But we also stress on the things that we have done very well, and the lessons that we can learn, so that we don't, form the opinion that, class is always trying to dig out the issue, the challenges that we have, but also to highlight some of the successes and the lessons that you can scale up. So that is what actually we make it very clear when we are embarking on that. And for the youth, especially the track fair, we have actually used that data to do further analysis, be able to determine that, okay, so we have even met some of our international commitments, something we didn't know before. So the import commitment, not less than 0.5% to sanitation and hygiene. We realize that we have even met it. Even though we kept stating ourselves at the back that we have never met it before, we have met it, and we have 0.7 at the last track, 0.7. And sometimes even for stakeholders, they get so surprised that really have. And for some of the issues, we want to take it up with AMCAL because we are not very sure how AMCAL came about the 0.5% and what was the basis. So the stakeholders have decided to get back to AMCAL for further explanation. And for me, that is very, very encouraging. And at least people are beginning to interrogate certain things because of the data that we share. Apart from that, we've also realized that we have on the further analysis that we did comparing the tracking results with our national targets and costing in our national plans, things like that. Also, actually, revealed a number of things. 85% of total expenditure in what goes into O&M, and people want to know. And we disaggregate because we don't want to know whether we are being efficient or, because the issue with sustainability is a challenge. So if you are spending 85% of wash expenditure on O&M, then we want to assume that we shouldn't be talking about the issue with sustainability. So if we can disaggregate it, and people that are asking whether they can disaggregate it, so that we will be able to know whether we are being efficient or whether there's something else that we have to do to make sure that we are being sustainable, with the services that we are providing. And that for me is also recently when we had a discussion with the NGOs, we even wanted further disaggregation into CapManex and CAPEX. We want to know, we don't want it to be brought together as the template currently is. We want to be able to disaggregate so that we really know what we're going to have and that is the tracker. With the GLAD, the other ones, the other indicators. And what we also normally do is, normally we have two reports. So one goes to GLAS, and that is the form. And then we also ask for a narrative report where you have recommendations that are made. The recommendations are supposed to be responded to by management of the sector. And normally the ministry and leads the implementation of. So what we do is also engage the management, those who make decisions, and we focus to presenting to them the report and the recommendation. We have had just the recent one, we had the chief director taking quick decisions based on the results. The fact that when we are doing our sector performance report, this is the DSR, the joint sector review that we call the sector performance reviews. When we normally do it, normally the topics are based on community. So, even though we invite the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health, we don't normally focus on the institutions. And so that came up, and the chief had to take immediate for us to make sure that we are now very active in that, and preparing to present their performance during the upcoming business. So these are some of the ways that we have been excited about it. And said that we are not where we want to be yet, but of course we need some.
Thanks very much. That's a great, and which part of the Ghanaian government are you with? Which? You're the minister, okay, all right. Thank you. That's interesting. And it sounds like you have really used glass to sort of shine a light on what is happening. So thanks for that example. Anybody else want to contribute anything before I pass on to the next question? No, you're not jumping up and down. So let's go to the next question and then we'll go back to the audience again. So what I want you to do now is look forward. If you were able to ask Betsy, if you had a wish list of everything you would like to happen in glass, what would you be asking the glass team to be doing? How would you like to use data? The more you learn about glass, how would you like to use that data going forward? And then, you know, how can glass also complement other data? And I think we've heard about how the glass data goes with the JMP data. They're kind of sisters. But is there ways that it could also complement other data that you use? So should I go in the same order? Ellen, shall I pick on you again?
Sure.
You're always ready to
Happy.
rise to the
Yes.
challenge.
Absolutely. So a set of vital indicators that Betsy had on her list of suggestions is also something that we would like to see, kind of socializing this idea that glass can be a set of, or can use a set of vital indicators to measure the strength of the system. I think is one aspect that we would really like to see. Continue to use it for advocacy for all of the different stakeholder groups. But I think another aspect I think that's really interesting is that we know how difficult it is oftentimes for people to pull data from, even if there's the overview of a country reports. So is there a way to also kind of listen or do some behind the scenes checking with the countries to see why or what they would find kind of most useful out of it, and to listen to those that, you know, you gave really great examples of success of where people have used it, but there's a lot more people not using it. And so, you know, why is that happening? And then just the last thing that I would say is that the examples of using it as part of joint sector reviews in these national level dialogues, is there also an opportunity to compare with commitments that are being made in other spaces and platforms? So UN Water regional commitments, you know, how do these align with things like the Ngor Declaration and the commitments made there? So that kind of comparison, I think, is the type of information that would also be useful when engaging from the kind of advocacy perspective as well, to know some of those things.
Excellent, thanks. James, should we turn to you?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'll answer this from two perspectives. One, the DC side, and then also on the country office side. From the DC perspective, we do use it, as I mentioned, in a lot of our planning materials. It's actually, thanks to the great work of one of my colleagues, Brian Banks, it's integrated into some of the dashboards that we use very frequently for just regularly accessing country data. So that's something that we're very pleased with how that's integrated. However, something, Betsy, that you were showing that I wasn't even familiar with is not only the portal, but also those overview documents. And that seems like it would be very useful for things like developing talking points or briefers, things like that, for you kind of need something quick to speak to political appointees or other things like that. So that seems like something that I'm going to bring back to the DC office to definitely use more of. It looks really interesting. And similarly, from the country office perspective, I would say that the utilization is lower because they don't have someone like Brian helping build tools like that. So I think there's some more evangelizing from my end, from my colleagues' end, to make sure that it's being used in the country offices as much as it is in DC. And similarly, I think that those reference documents, and I'm sorry, the overviews, I'm not sure how to refer to it.
Country profiles.
Country profiles, I think is going to be really a wonderful resource going into conversations with the Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources to have that discussion and have an open discussion that is very data forward.
And what's on your wish list?
Well,
ask for some crazy thing that glass will never be able to do.
well, that's no fun. Yeah.
That's no fun. Get India on board.
So when I was thinking about the wish list, I actually my preference would actually be less, more data, more unique indicators. Like, how many did you say? There were 300, 200, 300 indicators already. And I trust that your team is being really thoughtful on how they're bringing more indicators on board. I think focusing on, you mentioned this in next step, so I'm not bringing up two new ideas here, but focusing more on the usability and the how it can be integrated into different planning is something that we at USAID are really excited about contributing to and learning from you all as well. So I think, Mike, you mentioned this, the having, whether it's a sentinel indicator or some kind of index, I think is great from the academic side. I did a quick Google Scholar search this morning, just in case if anyone in the audience knows the academic literature that I have not kept up on, please come up and see me afterwards. But I didn't see any really obvious like analyses, especially looking at qualitative comparative analysis, things that integrate quantitative and qualitative data. I didn't see a lot of those approaches being applied to GLASS data. And I think that's a methodological approach that would really be ideal for the type of data that's being collected. So maybe that's not a wish list for you, Betsy, but for other people in the audience.
Great, thanks very much. Sudan, what would you like to see happening in the future?
Yeah, thank you. It's really very good questions. And I would like to first thank to GLASS team. They have started to include some case studies. That is really, for example, Nepal has got opportunity to put one case study about the Yanwas. Normally, every country, they are struggling how to include WAS data in YAMIS. That is not so easy.
Sorry,
That's why Nepal,
including it in which?
in health MIS system.
MIS system, okay.
Yeah, health related HMS.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so that, yeah, if we have WAS related HMS, MIS system, Nepal has started geo reference, national MIS system as the online system, and we call the YANWAS. And this GLASS report has given the place to include the case study like that. We would like to see more case studies. For example, equity also included in the next. But yeah, sometimes we don't know, even water supply system is not very giving the coverage to many people, but there could chance of worsen the lifestyle of some of the poor people. We never think about that. If we have some case studies on that line also, it will be very useful. Second, just you were asking about the complement for the other data. What happened in case of Nepal? Nepal started the WAS account and the component, percentage of the GDP that goes for WAS expenditure and budget, actual expenditure, source of the budget for users was coming very less, like 35% like that. Seeing the comparison to other countries, every countries they have almost more than 60%. That give us to correct our data. It is very useful, and that in that way also we can think. And finally, I would like to suggest we had regulation session, and regulation is not within the governance is very simple. Just asking one question, either regulatory authorities exist or not. That is not enough, because there is so many things. For a tariff competition, there is the penalties, and either these are the within the implementing agency, they are independent, like that. So many questions could be included. And the component of the regulation could be separate, just my thinking.
Yeah,
That's
great.
all.
Thanks very much. Mike, from the panel, you get the last word. What's on your wish list?
Oh, awesome, it's a long one. So some things is like just validation, for sure, simplification, these benchmarks and indexes, definitely. Second one, I would say, it's a dream to kind of see some consistency in because we have some great examples of use, but hopefully we and the process of the data collection, but we also know there's ones that are not awesome. So I think I'd like to see some consistency, and that's basically maybe that guide is going to be useful coming forward. Country snapshots, I think it was what JMP called them in the past. So I'm surprised it took 10 years to get to an overview, but those are going to be super useful. And if there's modifiable, if it's modifiable or tailorable by the countries, that'd be even better. Dissemination, let's talk about that and how we can help also, and maybe, you know, USAID and others can help with getting it out there so it gets used more. But here's the real dream. So the real dream, I think you mentioned it, and you said it's something that comes up every time you're in conversations about it, which is subnational analysis, right? So currently Kenya, I don't know, anybody from Kenya? So there's a recently launched a RUSH protocol in Kenya. And they're looking at advancing towards safely managed sanitation, and area wide. So area wide also includes being able to kind of monitor what's happening subnationally in the counties. So one of the things that we're looking at is being able to see if we can get that second set of the protocol to monitor also subnational processes at the county level. So in the ideal dream, it's like subnational level data is actually feeding into national data, and that national data is going up. At the minimum though, I'd like to see at least some subnational in the report, like at least examples, good examples, and maybe in 2 or 3 years or within the next 2 iterations of the report, Kenya might be a good example.
So thanks. And I think what all of you are sort of contributing to is this ongoing evolution of GLAS. The JMP has been around now for 25 years. It's had lots of time, but the GLAS is now on a similar trajectory. And I think at sessions like this, where we hear how it's being used, this then leads to this virtuous cycle that more people realize the value of GLAS, therefore people are more likely to contribute to the whole data collection system, more countries will come in, and then the data is more useful and gets used more. So thank you to all of you for being part of that. Patsy, are you going to talk about regulation? I hope so.
I was going to talk about it, but I can say if you were, I'm conscious of the time, but I just wanted to come back to the point.
You might want to stand up because I don't think the people behind can hear you.
Sure. I'm Patsy Majura. I'm with WHO working on regulation and WHO's International Network of Reporting Sanitation. I wanted to come back to the point that has been raised around subnational data and maybe putting forward some food for thought on how this could potentially be handled. Drawing on some experiences that we've had now through this network of regulators that I've coordinated, but also working specifically with regional associations of regulators. So in Africa, there's the East and Southern African Water Sanitation Regulators Association, SOS, that we have been working with through JMP to kind of build up national level indicators for on-site sanitation that regulators are interested in. But I think the reason why this is probably worth sharing and kind of, you know, chewing on further is the idea that you have structures such as GLAS, such as JMP, that are doing global level monitoring. It's not possible to tailor to every single region, every single country, because they have different needs, they have different priorities. But working with SOS in our context has allowed for that customization, if you like, of some of these indicators to the regional level. So the request from SOS was, we want to strengthen, as a regional association of regulators, how we are regulating, particularly on-site sanitation, because this is very neglected. But in setting up these indicators, we want to make sure that they align with the global indicators that already exist. So how do we work with JMP to make sure that what we are doing, which is tailored to our own context, is some alignment with the global context? And maybe if we're talking about subnational data with GLAS, that's something that we can consider as well. Instead of, okay, how does GLAS then go into region X and, you know, studying into subnational data? So something that we can all think about and potentially contribute to. Coming back to regulation, I fully support your points, Suzanne, but I'm also aware that there are a lot of moving parts in this process. There are a lot of things that are happening on regulation now in terms of the players that are involved, in terms of the scope of regulations that is extending. Because also thinking about, okay, what happens with rural supplies that previously nobody was thinking about regulating? How do we effectively capture that in not only our monitoring processes, but also in terms of the mandates that regulators have and being able to come up with clear indicators for that and monitoring. So I'm happy to share any information with people interested in some of the things that we're doing to kind of address those issues.
Okay, Thanks very much. And I think, you know, this push towards aligning all of these different indicators and having a greater level of coordination between the agencies that are collecting information. So we're almost at the end. And I think we're gonna have to stop here, but if people have more questions, I'm sure that Betsy and maybe some of the panelists would stick around. Betsy, do you want to say a last few words, or shall I send everybody on their way?
And really just gonna be, thank you so much. This was really a great discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to email glass@who.int. I check that inbox. I know it looks anonymous, but it will come.
It's Betsy.
So if you have any questions, feel free to reach me there. I'm happy to stick around, and thank you all, and go Glass. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the panel.
Nice meeting you in
Nice
person. You look so.
Yes, well, and I'm based in DC, so it's
Okay, I might have
possible
run
also.
into you.
And we've been at events and I've known Brian for like forever in all, yeah, and a lot of your other colleagues in all of, from his very first iteration in the last section.
Yeah.
So I know many of your colleagues. I think sure it won't be the last time that we see each other.
Thank you for
I know.
I forgot some cards.
You know what? I want to live. The best. If y'all had like a red flag.
Yeah.
You know, here's something you might be concerned about. Say that.
I think that is partly, I think that's, you know, discovering that that they're not keeping up.